From Unity Church of Christianity in Houston, Texas, this is The Awakened Life with Reverend Howard Caesar. Unity is a non-denominational Christian church providing a positive, practical, and progressive approach to Christianity. Let's join the service in progress with the Reverend Howard Caesar.
You know, as we travel the road of life and are on this journey of real spiritual awakening, I think it's always important for us to remember that wherever it is that we find ourselves on this path, whatever it is that might be the difficulty or the challenge that we're facing, whatever it is that is the fear or the worry or the anxiety or even the pain that we may be going through and dealing with, whatever the situation, there is always something that we can do spiritually. You know, there is something that we can do in spiritual consciousness to help us along the way. There is something that we can do to help bring spiritual awareness of what it is that we have come to learn, that can empower us, that can strengthen us, can sometimes soften the burden, lighten the load, just transform the situation. It's always important to realize that. I mean, that we are a spiritual being and there are spiritual principles, universal principles that are there as the tools to be able to apply that can make our journey all the better and more powerful. There is a former staff person from our youth department. Her name was Mary Grace. Some of you may remember. And she shared an incident that took place in her family back when her son, Jack, was only 4 years old. And basically what happened was they were upstairs and he was brushing his teeth, and after brushing his teeth, he made a dash from the bathroom to the bedroom and somehow stumbled and fell and bumped his head and started crying. And so Mary Grace ran downstairs to locate his cuddle toy for comfort and to bring it back up to him. And she had no more than found it, and he had stopped crying. And he was peering down from upstairs by the railing. And he said, Mommy, it's okay. And she said, what? And he said, my head, it's okay. And she said, well, that's great. And how is it that happened? What happened? And he said, Mommy, I put some God on it. I put some God on it, okay? So out of the mouths of babes, some good stuff comes. And it's a great line. I put some God on it. So whatever is happening in our life, in whatever state our life is in, it can always stand to have some God put on it. You know what I'm saying? And so what we're talking about is to put some prayer on it, to put some truth on it, to put some love on it, to put some light on it, some truth principles. You know, you can take anything in life and you can put some God on it and you're going to make it somehow better. And it's going to bring a peace of mind and harmony and just an increase in divine energy as you learn to do that. It's easy to forget how it is that we put God on it in our lives. You know, when things happen, oftentimes things get in the way. We don't always remember to put God on it when somebody swerves in front of us on the highway. We put something else on it a lot of times. And so from time to time, we have our own symbolic bump as we're traveling from room to room in this household of life. And we can get lost in the circumstances of the bump and how we got it and who did it to us, and can become overwhelmed by the specifics of it. Or we can remember to put God on it, you know, to stop and say, okay, there's a whole nother way to shift the energy here. And the way that we put God on it in our lives is really by pausing and going to a place, a sacred place within ourselves where we become centered and try and calm ourselves, slow down the rapid dynamic of the surface mind and detach a little bit and get to that place within ourselves where we're able to say, you know, here is what I know to be the spiritual truth about this. Here is what I know and have learned that I can bring to this situation as a tool or as a transformative dynamic. Here is what I believe spiritually I could do in this moment. And so where you find that place, this sacred place that will offer you that, is really in the heart. The heart is where you go. It's where the presence of God lives. And so when you go to your heart, it's where you really are able to find a sense of peace and calmness, and a sort of a correct and more powerful avenue is laid before you and shown to you. And so we become a different person, really, when we shift into our heart from the head and all the analysis of that. There's a greater depth, there's a greater sense of connection that takes place for us and others and life when we go to the heart and come from the heart. It's there that we feel closest to really the source of all that is good, the source of wisdom and the source of the guidance that we are ever receiving is there in the heart. That is the temple, really, of our being. Jesus said, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God." Blessed are the pure in heart. So that essentially we're wanting to consistently go to the heart. And when we do, we will see things that others do not. We will see life in a way that others do not. We'll experience life in another way, really. We know that there are a variety of ways in which we can think our way through life. You know, there is the many directions we can go with our mind. We can go high, we can go low, we can go positive, we can go negative, we can go to the good, we can go to the bad, all of that. And even as the Bible states, as a person thinketh in their heart, so is he, she, right? It's not as they think of in their head, it's really in their heart. It's making that distinction that you can actually think from your heart. That there is a sense of when you determine what it is you're going to do to respond or to react or whatever, to actually do this would be as opposed to this. You know what I'm saying? Oh my God. You know, it's no, put some God on it is what we're really talking about here. And so sometimes people miss out on the spiritual power that is there when we actually intentionally go to our heart and seek to think or respond from our heart. What would the divine have me do? And so some of you have heard about HeartMath, and HeartMath is an organization in Northern California, and they have made a science of the study of the heart. And they have scientifically studied these heart energies. They've been doing it for years and years, actually. I became aware of them somewhere around 25 to 30 years ago, the work that they were doing, and they have furthered it immensely. But they have laboratories and equipment, and they do research and studies in the dynamics of heart intelligence versus head intelligence. And at HeartMath, they've been able to actually measure the fact that the heart produces an electromagnetic signal that is 40 to 60 times stronger than that of the brain. And that the brain has an informational processing field, but that also they've discovered that the heart has a corresponding information processing field, and that heart field exists in a frequency domain, they say, which is beyond space and time. And it's just a whole nother realm and dimension. The energies that are coming from an individual that is functioning from their heart combined with their head together is 40 to 60 times more powerful and mighty than just in the surface mind alone. And so the importance of what's being taught there as they go around the world to different organizations is the importance of living from the heart and the difference that makes in the world as an individual and even in organizations. It takes you into a whole nother higher realm of consciousness. And so when we disconnect from the heart and live in the head, we basically separate on out from a lot. We isolate ourselves from various parts of living. We see the differences. We tend to be more in judgment. We tend to be more in the ego. And we basically come from I'm over here and you're over there, and all we see from the surface mind, the head alone, is a rationalizing justification of all the differences, whether it be social economic levels, or whether it be belief systems, political views, whatever. And so there's this kind of a distancing that takes place. But the heart is another frequency. It's another level of intelligence that is beyond this surface mind. And it's beyond form, actually. It moves you into a place where you recognize that indeed we all are one. It helps you remember that. And as Jesus said, those who are pure in heart see God. In other words, we begin to see God everywhere and in everything and in everyone. That's how a person, and the only way a person is going to get to the place where they begin to expand and broaden into an awareness that God is in everyone, and that we are all one family, and we are all brothers and sisters. It's going to the heart. Those who live in the head rationalize and justify all kinds of divisions and separations. And so it's so important and so vital to move into this heart dimension. And the mind alone tends to, divide, be in conflict, be in competition all the time, whereas the heart is more of a feminine energy. And typically the mind alone has been seen to be a masculine energy, the heart a feminine energy. Obviously, men and women, we all have both. But we are trying each of us, to learn to think more from and with the heart, and to react more to life's circumstances and situations from the heart, not just quickly to the head. In fact, in the tradition of the Tibetan Buddhists, there are references to the things of the heart as being actually female energies. And there is something that they call dakanis, D-A-K-I-N-I-S, which is basically their name for enlightened female energies, which are personified at times as deities. They see them in different forms, but it can come as in deities. And sometimes they call them sky dancers, because they represent this uninhibited dance of an awakened awareness of the heart. And Tibetan Buddhists, and in their tradition, they convey these teachings through stories, as many traditions do. And one such story that conveys this idea that we're talking about is where they tell the story about one day there were two Tibetan monks that were on a journey, a pilgrimage, and they came to this rushing river. And there on the banks of the river, they saw this ugly woman leper. And she was begging for alms. And as they got closer, she then asked them to assist her, these two monks, to get across this rapid stream and river. And so the first monk in the story, they say, had an immediate revulsion and just turned away and gathered his flowing monastic robes and headed into the water on his own alone. And when he got to the other side, he did no more than wonder if he should wait for his other fellow monk, wonder if he would abandon this woman as well, or whether he would bring her across. The second monk's response was very different as the story went. He felt sort of sorry for this helpless leper woman. And with compassion, he went to his heart and spontaneously picked her up and hoisted her onto his back, and then struggled down the river bank and into this swirling current of a river. And it was then that as he met about midstream or halfway across, that something amazing happened within this story as they tell it. And that was that, in the muddy water boiling about him and the woolen robes flowing out like a tent, suddenly this monk was miraculously felt the burdens of the weight of what he was carrying totally lift from within and physically as well. And he looked up and was able to behold the wisdom deity, the queen of the sky dancers, who was there soaring gracefully above him and overhead, and reached down to draw him up into the sky dancer's paradise where she reigned. And that's the story. And the first monk, they say, having failed the test of compassion, had to continue on his pilgrimage alone. Very alone. Life is alone when we're not of the heart. And so the story is saying that there is a reward for he or she who lives in his heart, has compassion. There's a rising up. There's a raising up in spiritual consciousness, and an expansiveness. Very powerful. And essentially what we're talking about here is developing a steady heart, the steadiness of the heart that has the tendency to to persevere, to be consistent with the energies of the divine moving through, to learn to think with your heart, not just with your head, to remember to do that. You know, when we look at really the physical characteristics of our heart, it's interesting because they can be even symbolic in the way that the fact that the heart is centrally located within our bodies. It's not located in an arm, in a leg, in the head. It's actually centrally located, so it has ease of finding its way to extend life-giving energy with its flow to all the extremities of one's physical body and to all the parts. And on another level, we could say it's sort of symbolic of the idea that it's essential to a person's spiritual health to be able to think from his or her heart so as to be centered in the heart and therefore have the heart energies be finding their way to the extremities of one's life, not just isolated in one little pocket here or one little pocket there, but it finds its way to all the extremities of one's life with love and compassion and goodness, and not just to a few. And so it's more when we're in our head, it's more exclusive. When we're in our heart, it's more inclusive, dynamic and energy. And so, and even sometimes we tend to isolate into our own little families. And we need to remember that the range of us as a being, once we're in our heart, begins to have such a far greater reach. There is a kind of a spiritual brother that I have. Sometimes I've referred to him over the years. His name is Cameron. And Cameron is just totally devoted to his spiritual path. And he reads wonderful wisdom literature and, that of just masters and sages and seers and Jesus. And he'll send me quotes from different areas that he's read. It might be just one line. It might be a paragraph. And he sent me something that has to do with this idea of being connected to a larger world as your family. And it's probably appropriate for what we're talking about today. I'll just read what he sent to me on a card. It comes in the mail almost weekly. How would you like to have that, huh? That kind of support. But this is what was on the card that he sent recently. Encouraged by love for God in meditation, one might best begin soul neighborliness by reaching out in helpfulness to persons who are outside one's family, yet are nearer than the world at large. Persons instinctively show preference in giving to their families rather than to strangers. And the idea of, quote unquote, the world itself is a concept far removed and abstract. But when a person lives just for himself and the select few he chooses to favor as his own, he chokes the expansion of his life. And from the spiritual standpoint, he does not live at all. On the contrary, when a person extends his sympathy and caring from the us, for, or more consciousness to his neighbors and to the world, his little life flows into the greater life of God and becomes the eternal life, which the second requisite in answer to the question put to Christ by the lawyer was, what shall I do to inherit eternal life? You get that essentially what we're saying is that to reach the extremities, if to live from the heart, you just become and have more of an impact. It reaches out 40 to 60 times, science is telling us, when you're in the heart. And rather than just us four or more kind of mentality and consciousness, it's extending on out to a greater sense of everyone is your neighbor and the world. And so we all want to flow with the possibilities of a greater life of God moving through us. We came in with that intent to be a light in the world. Jesus told us that's what we're to be, and that takes us stronger and deeper and into the frequencies of the heart as we open to that light. So, another interesting physical characteristic of the human heart in the physical body is that it's beating continuously. It's consistent, it's reliable, it's steady, and it pushes that life through the blood on a regular basis. It doesn't say, I think I'm going to take the weekend off. I'm just going to shut down a couple of my aortas over the weekend and polish them up or whatever. It just doesn't happen. It just continues on. It's consistent. And so the goal for us is to be steady and consistent in really coming from the heart and being about that. There's a wonderful story the Dalai Lama I've heard share a couple of instances because it so impacted him, and it had to do with a dear friend of his who was Tibetan and who had been in a Chinese prison for many years. And when he finally got out, he had a conversation with his friend, and his friend was telling him about an experience that he had that in which he said, I was in great dire danger. And so as he referred to this danger, His Holiness the Dalai Lama thought it was, danger for, meant for his life. And he said, well, what kind of danger was this? And his Tibetan friend said, from this Chinese prison, the great danger that he faced was the danger of losing my compassion for the enemy. In other words, he was so devoted to love and compassion and beholding the other, no matter what the circumstances. He said he was almost in danger of losing his compassion for the enemy in dealing with the circumstances that he did during that time in prison. And so that's our danger, is drifting away from the ways of the heart. And we do it from time to time. We all do, because somehow life takes us into the distractions of focusing and measuring and weighing and kind of being in that part of the mind. And so we have to really discipline ourselves. And that's part of what meditation is. That's part of what prayer is. It's putting some God on it and going to that inner temple within. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God, and they shall be used by God, for good. Because you are of the heart, and in the heart, you will be shown in ways to be helpful in powerful ways. There's a letter that was sent to me some time ago by one of our congregants, and they said it was all right for me to share, but it was a miraculous experience in which this lady, her name was Pat, she was a consultant at the time and was traveling to Austin on flights back and forth some, and she was on a flight, sat down, got in her seat, and it wasn't very full, and she said the night before she had seen her boyfriend and they had been talking about breaking up, and it finalized that night before. And she had hoped that it had a chance, but it didn't. So she was really bummed out. She was sad, she was defeated, she was hurt. She sat down in her seat and she shut her eyes as they took off for Austin, and she said she prayed the entire flight. And instead of praying for God to change her boyfriend's mind, which she had been praying for days, she said that she instead began to pray that God just ease her heart, that God bring her inner peace, and that her heart not ache anymore the way it had. And very soon it seemed to touch down in Austin. She opened her eyes, she gathered up her things, and as she was waiting to step out the aisle, there was a young girl in front of her in the seats ahead that had to go first. And this girl in front of her handed her a note. And she took the note, and she had all these things in her hands, so she didn't have a chance to read it. She was kind of startled and puzzled. And finally, when she got off the plane, she paused and opened it up and read it. And it was a little note that said, "This is a reminder that Jesus loves you. God will always provide for you. You are in my prayers." And this was very stunning to her because she had just got done praying from her heart that God would, help ease the pain. And she became very emotional, and she sought this girl out at baggage claim. And, she said, why she gave her the note. And the girl said she didn't know. And Pat asked, if she did this all the time. And she said she had never done this before. And Pat was crying because she just felt like God had responded so quickly. And this girl said, no, I just was there. Something inside me said, almost as if it were God, that you have a pad in your purse, dig it out. She dug it out, she got a pen. She said I didn't even think about it. It was just almost automatic. Those words were put down on the page. And then I folded it up and didn't know what to do with it. And when we landed and I stood up, all I saw was you. My eyes kept going to you. I couldn't take my eyes off of you. And so I gave it to you. And this girl was only 18 years old. It was her first flight. She was coming from Alabama to take care of her elderly grandmother. And So Pat felt a little funny that she was having an 18-year-old soothing her. But she saw that it was really God that was speaking to her through this whole experience. And so it's an example here of an 18-year-old that was so pure of heart that she was able to follow that inner guidance. And she opened up to the movement of the divine. She certainly had to go to her heart. And as a result, the gift that she extended was very, very powerful. You know, in our series on relationships, I mentioned a John Gottman, a expert in relationships, and the thing that he had learned over all the years was the concept of turning toward. Turning toward, he said, was the key to a relationship continuing and being good, as opposed to turning away. And he meant by that turning toward the person with understanding, turning with forgiveness, turning with love, all of that. And what I'm saying here is that we can learn, that's a powerful concept, and if we can only, in all of our circumstances, remember to turn toward the divine, to turn toward God, to turn toward this presence, to turn toward our heart and the pureness of heart, to turn toward love and compassion, and rather than away from it, we're always having to decide how we're going to turn. Toward or away from the highest that is in us. The heart will always take us to the highest. Something wonderful is always waiting and wanting to happen to us. And the idea of turning toward is just another way of saying, I'm open. I'm open, God. I'm turning toward you. There's an opening in me. Go ahead and put some God in me so I can put some God on it. It's just that intention, that willingness to go there. So the question is, are you open to putting some God on it? Whatever the it is that you are facing in your life, whatever it is that is challenging you, are you willing to put some God on it? All right, some truth on it, some compassion on it, some heart on it. And are you open to being put on by God? In other words, are you open to receiving the same way that Pat did on this flight, in which she opened to her heart, directed towards the divine prayerfully, and received and had something put on her, which was of the divine. This week I want you, as your homework, to look at what the it is that you are to put some God on, okay? And to be open to the realization that you can be put on as well through the opening of the divine in you. God bless you all.
The awe-inspiring medium, James Van Praagh, bridges the gap between two planes of existence, that of the living and that of the dead, by providing evidential proof of life after death via detailed messages. His very natural, easygoing style would lead you to believe that he's chatting with a friend on the telephone. Don't miss James Van Praagh as he presents An Evening of Spirit, Thursday, April 11, 7:30 p.m. at Unity Houston. A book signing will follow in the sanctuary. For tickets, call 713-782-4050 or purchase them online at unityhouston.org.
Thank you for joining us for today's message. We invite you to be with us again next Sunday. At Unity, we believe that God's presence of love and goodness is everywhere, and that life is meant to be good. You can find out more about Unity and our teachings at unityhouston.org.